So we'll also have to work in the House on denying funds for implementation and in the Senate on votes against its most egregious provisions.
Would you take that to the point of shutting down the government or not passing a budget if that's the only way to deny funding for the health care bill?
No, I think we're not talking about shutting down the government. What we're doing here is talking about responding to the American people's desire that this bill not become law. And my first choice, obviously, would be to put a full repeal on his desk. If we are unable to do that, or if we were able to do it, he would certainly veto it. Then you come back and you go after it piece by piece.
You heard him. The election results are in, and the loudest pundits and politicians, like that one, are claiming it was a referendum on the Democrats' health care law. Was it? Regardless, Republicans are promising to roll the law back in the states piece by piece and in Congress by denying implementation dollars from the top. Our next guest says don't despair. In fact, he argues some challenges to mandatory insurance might be a good thing. More than that, he makes the case that California's progressive victories are the policy verdicts to bear in mind. He's not discouraged, he's not in despair, and he doesn't agree that California is just, well, different. In a moment, Jamie Court, a lifelong activist and president of Consumer Watchdog. He's the author of the brand new The Progressive's Guide to Raising Hell: How to Win Grassroots Campaigns, Pass Ballot Box Laws, and Get the Change We Voted For. Here's his promo.
This is what democracy looks like. Let me tell you something.
All right, Jamie, cheer me up here now. Tell me that democracy looks like that small group of people in the rain, or rather Mitch McConnell saying we rule.
Well, look, big corporations could not buy democracy in California on Tuesday. And last Tuesday, we beat the insurance companies. They spent $5 million to buy the insurance commissioner's office. We beat the oil companies who wanted to repeal the greenhouse gas law. We beat the oil companies that laundered money through the Chamber of Commerce to unelect Barbara Boxer. And the woman who spent the most ever on a political campaign, Meg Whitman, spent $150 million, and she lost because she mistreated an undocumented nanny. So if you want more evidence that populism's alive in America, I say look to California.
It's just alive in California. It's California dreaming. Never heard the phrase?
I've heard it, but, you know, look, we also elected Arnold Schwarzenegger. We've elected a lot of Republicans. We're losing Democrats. We're gaining independents. This is still the muddled middle. This is still a state that is a barometer for the country. And while we absolutely are a little bit more progressive, there's no question, what happened here was populist tactics, populist politics, and I think the rest of progressives in America can learn a little. We did a lot of raising hell this election. We've done a lot of raising hell over the last 10 years, and Democrats and progressives around the country are often more concerned about raising money than raising hell. And I think that's why we've lost a lot of races. They haven't gone far enough. They follow Obama's mode of not wanting to offend. And look, you know, as I talk about in the book, you know, you can't be a gadfly if you're worried about being called annoying. We've got to change our tactics. And I think you could look in California and say, we've stood strong on what 70% of Californians believe in. They don't like corporations trying to buy elections. They don't like CEOs trying to buy elections. And we've applied some really strong tactics of taking on fights where the public is 70% with us. And I think nationally we can do that too around health reform.
Well, let's talk about where the heat's going to be or where the action's going to be on health care. Is it going to be in Congress with the Mitch McConnells of the world, or is it going to be at the states? The GOP gained 11 new governorships, now controls something like 25 legislatures, up from 14. I've heard it said that that's actually where you're going to see the biggest threat to health care reform.
Well, look, I think there's two things. One is, at the states, that is the opportunity. I talk about this in Raising Hell. We are going to the ballot in 2012 with a public option, an alternative to the private market, and really strong health insurance premium rate regulation. We're going to do that in California. 24 states have ballot measure processes. Progressives can go on the offensive. We don't have to worry about all the Democratic seats we lost in the governor's office if we use the ballot measure process. And believe me, if we build it, they will come. But in Washington, you know, I don't agree with Mitch McConnell on very many things. But the one thing I will tell you that I think I do agree with Mitch McConnell on is 70% of Americans are against mandatory health insurance. In some polls, it's even 80%. They don't want to have to buy a private health insurance policy or pay a fine. We could repeal that provision of the health reform. We could satisfy a lot of Americans, and if progressives and Democrats were smart, they would do it, because there's a lot of great stuff in health reform. I fought for it. limits on out-of-pocket costs, fair rules for the insurance market. But the dog in the bunch, the big dog in the bunch, is a requirement that everyone have to buy health insurance, and there's no regulation of its cost. It's insane. And progressives, if we stood on that, as unpopular as that would be with some people in the Democratic Party that never want to admit they're wrong, and say we should repeal mandatory health insurance because it's not affordable for the middle class, we could take the high ground and not only change things. I think it would be really strange for the Republicans to back away from an offer like repeal mandatory health insurance, but also it gives us leverage to get the rest of our agenda, which is making health insurance affordable, creating public options to the private market, going back to what was promised us in 2008 and wasn't delivered. We can't wait for Obama. We got to take it into our own hands.
Right, well, this is what Obama has to say. He thinks, he kind of concedes that there was a reaction to health care this election. Take a look.
We knew that it probably wasn't great politics.
You were told that by your aides.
Absolutely. And the reason is there's a reason why our healthcare system hasn't been reformed over the last several decades. Why every president talks about it and it never happens. Because it's hard. It's a huge, big, complicated system. I made the decision to go ahead and do it. And it proved as costly politically as we expected, probably actually a little more costly than we expected politically.
I think the problem was they didn't go for non-profit, public, single-payer health care. But if you're going to go within the private system, Jamie, can you have a system that's fair without mandatory coverage for everybody? Isn't somebody always going to say, well, it's not fair for me to pay for that guy who didn't buy to insure himself?
Well, you live in New York. There's a take-all-comers law in New York. Everyone has to be sold a health insurance policy, which was what we got, regardless of their pre-existing condition, in exchange for mandatory health insurance. And premiums haven't gone down in New York. You know, we have a system where now we're starting to look at premium regulation in New York. Massachusetts has mandatory health insurance. It hasn't helped bring in premiums. They're doing premium regulation. The answer really is let's get tough on the insurance companies. We're going to have that system. But I agree with you. We need an alternative to the private health insurance market. I think there's no question that the Washington wisdom that you need mandatory health insurance to force insurance companies to sell to everybody is wrong. You can create carrots in the system for people to buy insurance. You can create lesser deterrence than forcing people to pay 8% of their income. That's what they have to pay for a health insurance policy or pay for a fine. And the subsidies are pretty generous. I'd keep the subsidies in the health reform bill, but they only go up to 400% of the poverty. If you're a family making $80 grand a year and you have 4 people in your family and you're being told by the government to buy a $7,000 health policy, that's really unfair, particularly when that policy is literally about half the cost of a decent health insurance policy. So you're going to be shelling out money in deductibles and copays. The logic is inescapable. This is a ticking time bomb for the Democrats, mandatory health insurance, and the sooner they dump it, the better off they are. But regardless, we have the power at the state level to enact public options, to enact tough rate regulation. And the mandate, in many ways, gives us an excuse to go out and be proactive and say, we're all going to have to buy health insurance. Let's fix it.
Very, very quickly, we've got about 15 seconds. You have 5 rules for progressives that are going out to make a ruckus in your book. Quickly, what are they?
Stand on public opinion. Always go with 70% public opinion. Make your case real human. Human stories are what break through even to hardened politicians. Go out and go on offensive. Don't let the other side take the offensive. And don't worry about that seat at the table they may give you. Find the rock to throw through the window, and that, in this case, the initiative process.
Jamie Court, thanks for joining us from Consumer Watchdog. There's more information about that group and Jamie's book.